Fullers book events for the year. Looking forward to kicking it off all again in 2021. Hoping it's a better year than it's been this year. And of course we're all here tonight for the launch of Andrew Wilson's new book, and if anyone's followed his other books, I can, well, I haven't actually read through it yet, but I'm looking forward to seeing Andrew's wonderful photographs because he does take good photographs, I can say that. Just there's not much from me. I'm going to hand over to Jane Longhurst, but just to remind you that after the event we've got plenty of books out there for sale, and we'll have Andrew and I out there for signing books. But please don't feel that you've got to rush out because we've got to maintain those social distancing rules. So I'll keep an eye on the signing line if people want to stay in here and chat or whatever. But with that, big round of applause for our guests, and I'll just
Well, good evening, everyone, on a beautiful, beautiful late November day. I hope you noticed all the white caps on the River Derwent. It's pretty fresh out there. I've completely incorrectly read the dress code. I've gone with a frock and heels, and I should have worn a navy blue blazer and moccasins. So I feel like such a charlatan. My name is Jane Longhurst, and indeed thank you to Peter. And do remember, Fullers celebrate 100 years in 2020, so we absolutely are so thrilled that they are remaining such a crucial part of our community as an independent bookseller. Thank you also to our friends here at the RACV Hotel, and welcome, and thank you for making some time and on the eve of your weekend to join me here. You will shortly meet our very special guests here, but I also would like to acknowledge our Tasmanian Aboriginal community and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise their sovereignty over the beautiful country that we call home. Housekeeping, I've been too busy gas bagging, so I haven't actually checked where the toilets are, but Peter will, if oxygen masks will drop from the ceiling, and if you need to use the toilet, follow Peter, he'll point you there. I may trouble you, if I may, just to dim or mute your phone, please, just in case, because you know it will ring at the most, at the most climactic moment. I promise you it will ring. So the process for this evening is, we're just having a conversation. But we really hope that there will be, and I sense all of you have deep knowledge of one of these people, if not all of these people. So there may very well be questions bubbling up on your lips that are way more learned than mine. So we will give you an opportunity for questions at the end just before signing, but we will have a conversation of about half an hour, 40 minutes to 4 hours. I think you could easily extend that way. And Andy's very keen to encourage you to go to the bar afterwards for a socially distanced, non-vertical drink. Again, before I introduce our very special guest, I also want to acknowledge Richard Bevan, who's the Commodore of the Royal Yacht Club of Tasmania, Tracy Matthews, past Commodore and immediate past Commodore, and Biddy Badanack, who was the race coordinator from the RYCT. Quick show of hands, who's actually done a Hobart? I remain impressed, and I break out in a brief sweat at how impressed I am indeed. Do come in and welcome. It's great that you're here. Let's have a quick introduction, though, of our very special guests who are up to my left. Andy Wilson, or Andrew Wilson, am I bold in calling you Andy, is a professional photographer based here in Hobart, and through his lens, he focuses on storytelling, authentic storytelling from local Tasmanians, but I'm sure you'll go anywhere at the right invitation. You may well know his work from his self-published series of Old Sea Dogs of Tasmania, and tonight we're going to hear how Andy Wilson has divided 4 years of his life putting this wonderful book together, travelling between Hobart and Melbourne, Eden, Canberra, and of course Sydney. In the middle and next to Andy on his left is Di Pearson, who is our very special guest, who it's wonderful she's been able to come down from Sydney. We welcome Di Pearson. She's a journalist, and you will know her. You've probably spoken to her in all sorts of different contexts as race media director. And other than having, I think, actually saying the actual event, I think that's one of the sweetest and toughest jobs going around. And of course, the gentleman to my far left, of course, needs no introduction. Our 45th Premier, member for Franklin, and in March 2018 succeeded Angus Bethune as the longest serving leader in the history of the Tasmanian Liberal Party. Yes, he's competitive, isn't he? Resigned on the auspicious date of the 20th of the 1st, 2020. but was appointed as the chair of the Australian Business Growth Fund, which I have my suspicions is kind of a cover for the fact that he's consulting to the Geelong Football Club about how to get Jeremy Cameron from GWS to Geelong, but that's just my personal suspicion. Would you please join with me in welcoming our trio? Now I have a terrible confession to make before we start. I am actually the daughter of a master mariner, so I should have worn my locks. But he described sailing as a kid growing up as standing in the shower and ripping up $100 bills. He liked to play with the really big boats, and that's where, but he was always respectful of people who pitted their wits out in the open seas. But I think I would rather stand naked on stage and have offal thrown at me than actually get pushed out to sea. It terrifies me so very much. Because long distance sailing actually changes you. I know you'll be amazed, but who would have thought that this handsome young man to my left is actually this man? I know, after one of his races. So, Andy, you scrubber. Which is wonderful. Who is the man on the cover, Andy?
Larry Jamison.
And why did Larry get the auspicious front cover?
Well, Di actually, I'd just like to say, Di called him Larry me today. That was a good one. I hadn't heard that one before. Well, Larry is a very highly regarded sailor amongst the whole community. He sailed with the big end of town, the small end of town. He's done the Volvo race and he's done all sorts of different things. And he's just a really well admired person, which I found out through Di. And I actually, I took his photo purely by chance. I was saying to Di today that I was walking along the dock and looking for crusty old characters and or crusty characters. And there was this guy standing on the boat and he had this really crusty face, and I took a photo. I said, "Oh, look, how many races have you done?" He said, "Oh, 2." And I was like, "Oh, okay, well that's kind of not much of a story there maybe." So I thought, well, I'm looking for this sort of person. He goes, "Oh, I should talk to that guy," and he pointed at Larry. And I just sort of went across, I can't remember which boat he was on, but I said, "Oh, Larry, can I take a photo?" And he just turned around, looked at me, and I took a photo, and then that was kind of how that happened. And then, yeah, and Di told me about his background, and it was difficult to choose, wasn't it, Di?
Yes, there were so many good photos.
I've no doubt that it was a difficult choice. What's your connection, Di, particularly with Larry?
Well, I've known Larry for a long time. Everybody knows Larry with his various nicknames: Larry the Lounge Lizard, Larrabee, Laramie, Lazar. And Larry's just your Mr. Everyday Yachty. He's not a rich boat owner, he's not a show-off, he's just somebody that a lot of people like, that does a lot of ocean miles on deliveries, yacht racing. He's very honest, he's very funny, and yeah, he's just a nice guy that I don't know anybody who doesn't like Larry. And so I just thought he was really the perfect choice for that cover, and I've had a lot of texts and phone calls and emails from people going, "Wow, I'm going to buy that book because Laz is there, the Lounge Lizard's on the cover." Yeah, so that's how Larry, I mean, if you saw Larry away from this salty book, you wouldn't recognise him. He looks quite different. I find it hard to recognise Larry without all that salt on his face.
But that's probably true for hundreds of sailors, Di, probably through your eyes.
Yes, although some of them are more easily recognisable, but Larry does a lot of delivery miles all around the world, and he does a lot of yacht racing. So I more see Larry like this than I see Larry with a clean shaven face. So I just do a double take, and I saw him only 3 weeks ago at the Cruising Yacht Club of Australia, and he's Di, and I went, "Is that Larry?" I had to walk across and said, "Is that you, Larry?" And he said, "Yes, it's me." And so he's in the middle now of doing the delivery back from America with the Expo Jest and 80-footer that Grant Warrington and 3 partners have bought, and it's coming back here to do the Rolex Sydney Hobart. So Larry's just always on the water somewhere with all his funny stories and all different mates. So
Yeah, actually he was doing a delivery when I sent him the text that I'd written or compiled for him, and said, "Oh, Larry, can you just approve this for me before I publish it?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm sure it's fine. I'm in the middle of the coast, doing a delivery. It's fine. Just go." So yeah, and he said to me the reason why he started sailing was because he was shoeing a chick, and That seems to be a fairly common occurrence.
Volume 2,
Yeah.
written as we speak. I have to say, I interviewed Andy about 6 weeks ago on Sunday morning on ABC Wireless, and Andy shared with me the book in soft copy format, so as a PDF. And I said it to him on air, and I mean it to this day. And you've heard my guilty confession that I have no courage and I'm no physical courage and I'm not a sailor. But I was riveted by a PDF. I mean, a PDF. So imagine how good it's going to be when you're actually holding it in your hands. It was absolutely riveting. And I think when you're taking on something as iconic and complex as the Sydney to Hobart, trying to sort of map how you began or who was in and who wasn't, and the romances and the chasing of the chicks and so on. And I mean, how did it kind of actually form in your mind that actually I could achieve this?
Well, it's always been a race that I've admired. My father, who's just over there, he did the 50th, and I've always admired my dad's courage going out to sea and sailing and all that sort of stuff. And in the 50th as well, Bob Clifford, they won the race on Tasmania, and as I was, I don't know how old I was then, 94, so I was not that old, not that young. But I just remember just being so proud and so passionate about it and just so enthralled by it. And when I interviewed Bob for my second Sea Dogs book, he said that to me, and it just sparked this thought in my head that, you know, that's the next thing I should probably do. And Sea Dogs have been, you know, so well received. I just thought this is just a great topic to kind of find more stories of different people, and also I've, you know, copped a bit of, not flack, but I've had people ask me, why are there any women in your books, Andrew, you know, and over the years, and it was purely because I was just focusing on old, you know, the sea for Sea Dogs, but with this book I was able to do young, old, men, women, the whole lot, and that's been particularly really satisfying doing that. So, but it was certainly a bit of a big moment when I sort of I went down to the dock, and Paul Clitheroe had just finished. He just finished the race and was looking very, very knackered, and I just think fast enough here, but he was looking so stuffed. There he is. So many pages, I can't remember which one's which now. Right. Where are we? Here we go. I just want to illustrate the point. So that was Paul. You can see that. And I sort of just thought, I know that face. That's Paul Clitheroe. And I walked up and I just said, "Oh, Paul, I'm doing this book on Sydney Hobart." He knew no one. And I said, "Can I take your photo and get your contact numbers?" And he just said, "Yeah, sure. And you can get my number through the club. It's fine. Take a photo." And he just looked so satisfied and exhausted at the same time. And I just thought, oh, there's something in this. And so that was sort of the beginning of 2016. And then in 2017, I ended up at the CYC and met Fletch, who's just here in the front. And I saw Fletch walking down the runway at the club, and I thought, God, that's a good face. And I've never met Fletch before.
It is a
with
good
the
face,
hair
Fletch,
and all
yes.
that. And I thought, oh, that's good. And I walked, you know, so he was the first guy I approached. Oh, I'm doing this, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what I said to you, but anyway, Fletch was like, oh, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, come on, we'll just set this up. And took this photo and interviewed Fletch. And he started reeling off, I got to talk to this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy. And my head was starting to sort of fill up and almost was sort of getting to boiling point, because I was thinking, God, how am I going to find all these people and who am I going to decide to photograph? And that's when David Kellett, who I'd also been speaking to, who's famous for the race, said you've got to talk to Di. And so that's when I approached Di. I don't know what you thought when you first met me, but I walked in looking a bit dazed and confused, maybe, I suppose. Help, Di, help, please. So that was sort of how it started. Yeah.
So what was your reaction, Di?
Well, at first he just asked me if I would be interested in doing some bits on the legends. David Kellett had rung me and said, I hope you don't mind, I've given this guy your name, do you know him? I said, no. And I said, but that's okay. So he said, he rang and asked would I be interested in doing just 10 short pieces on who I thought the legends of the race were. And so I said, sure, fine. And then he started to ring me a bit more, and can you help? I've got someone else writing, but can you help with some history, and could you do this and could you do that? And then I had a call one day saying that the other person had gone by the wayside, and would I be interested in taking on all the other bits, historical bits, and helping with some of the people who should be interviewed, and we just started into it a bit slowly because I was flat out with all my freelance sailing journalist, and then COVID struck, and he rang me and said, "Let's get stuck into it. I'll get it finished. I'll get here okay."
Now, I think 2020 has actually yielded in some respects quite a beautiful silver lining in a very dark cloud, and I think that's an example where the fallow times actually enabled you to make it a really fruitful time. But Di, let's learn a little bit more about what it is to be a sailing journalist and some of the races perhaps that you've covered, and then perhaps how and when you first met the gentleman to your left.
Okay, so I've always been a sailor. I come from a sailing family, and
Did you grow up in Sydney?
yeah, I grew up a bit in Sydney and also on Norfolk Island. My mother is she's a direct descendant of the movie On the Bounty. She's a Quintal, so I went to school a bit there. But my sailing really came from my dad's side. They were just all lived at Watson's Bay, and so it was just natural for us to get involved, and I just loved it. Took to it like fish to water, and when I was at school, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and my dad said, well, the best thing you could do, dear, is go and do a secretarial course, and you're good at writing, so why don't you go and do some creative writing or whatever. And anyway, I did all of that, and then went and worked in real estate. And it was only about 8 years later, I just thought, I went overseas backpacking and thought, it just clicked. I'm coming home and I want to go work as a yachting journalist, and I know everyone. I've been sailing offshore and inshore for years, and so I did. I ended up doing 4 America's Cups with Sid Fisher, and he kick-started me, and he was my mentor, my absolute mentor, and a lot of people are Sid Fisher, grumpy old Sid, but he was my absolute mentor and got me started and gave me all sorts of opportunities, as he has to a lot of sailors, that you wouldn't normally get. And from there I was mostly working overseas at the Admiral's Cup and the Kenton Cup in Hawaii, and then I started to get work at home, and in '89 I started in the media centre for the Sydney Hobart, and I worked there for a year, went away, was doing some editing for a magazine, and then I came back in '91, and I went through the '94, the '93 race, which was tough. '94, left again. Well, they got somebody new in as a full-time position at the CYC, and so I just started picking up all these other jobs with Olympic skiffs, all sorts, races overseas, races here, races in Asia, Olympic Games. I was to be at my 3rd with Tokyo Games, but because of COVID, that's been postponed till next year. So I came back to the race after finishing again in '95. I came back in 2009, and from there became the media director, and at this point I met this gentleman to my left, because he was as tied up in our race as we were. He always made himself available at very short notice. The year that still makes me laugh, sorry. The year that Wild Oats actually finished first online and broke the record, and then there was a protest by Comanche, and so the line on us was hanging in the balance, and at about 6 o'clock that night the protest had been heard, and I had a friend, Danielle, who was working in the media centre with me, who had gone back to work for Will, and I said to Dan, I need Will here now, what can you do? And she said, oh, Di, it's dinner time. I said, can you just ring him? And anyway, so she did. She rang Will, and Will interrupted his dinner to come down to award the onstage line honours victors, and he was just always making himself so available like that to not just to us but to the yachties, and he'd be there wandering around, and so I was thrilled when he was able to come and launch his book for us tonight, because he's just been so accessible to us.
Anything to get out of the washing up. Well, you're clearly an unabashed fan of the race. Is it because you, like every Hobartian, you grow up and usually on about the 28th, 29th of December, you go down to Constitution Dock and walk around, do a lap? What is it that makes you so intrigued?
I think it is. It's part of our life. we grow up with it. Even, you know, for someone like me who's not a natural sailor or someone who's done the race, you feel like it's part of your life. And so I've always had this connection with the race, but I guess when I got into my former job, I realised that this is something really special for our state. I was always looking for things that separate us from the rest of the world, where we can position ourselves and stand apart from the pack. And there's only one Sydney Hobart that finishes in Hobart, and it's one of the best sporting events in the world. It brings some of the richest, most influential, passionate characters to our state, and the eyes of the world are on us. And I often thought to myself, how can we use it, albeit, you know, to promote our state and unashamedly put our state centre stage, even more so. So when I became Premier, I was really keen to make sure we do that, and to allow Tasmanians to appreciate what we do, but for the rest of the world to see Tasmania, you know, all its glory. I don't think there's a better time to be a Tasmanian. It's great to have so many world-class sailors come here, have a world-class race. I think we should also celebrate that Tasmania is the home to some of the world's best artists and writers and photographers, and to bring that together in a magnificent book like this, I think is wonderful. So congratulations to both of you for an amazing piece of work.
So much work indeed. And I think it's interesting because we know that we can't say we're world class, and we can't say we're punching above our weight, because that's just a cliche. But I think it genuinely is true, particularly in what you're saying, Diane. You'll know this because you work so internationally, that if you walk into any yacht club in the world and you say you're from Australia, the reaction is, oh, have you done a Sydney to Hobart? That is true, isn't it?
Absolutely true. Absolutely true. And the yachties talk about it all the time. How they'll just turn up in a bar somewhere with a yachting shirt and a cap, and they go, oh, you're a sailor, have you done the Hobart? So yeah, everybody, you get that every time you go somewhere, or you see it even in the street, you know, if I'm wearing an old sailing shirt, oh, do you know about Sydney Hobart?
Does she? My word. So in terms of the period of the race, how did you sort of massage the time that you cover, the duration of the history of the race, Sandy?
So the main thing really was, it's a book about the race. It's not about the race as a whole. It's not about a particular race. The stories are asking questions that about people's experiences and why they love the race and why they do it and why they put themselves in such extreme conditions and those sort of things. And it was also why I went to Eden and Canberra to talk to people. Like in Eden, you know, that's where all the boats retire to. If they've copped the pounding in Bass Strait and they've broken something, they go back to Eden. And I just thought it was, you know, who are those people? You know, why do they do that? And I met Robin, who, she coordinates the whole town basically, and she just does it for free, and she let me sleep in their spare room, and they've had like 12 yachties, you know, drowned in salt, yachties sleeping on their floor, you know, over the years, and they'll go down at 3 AM and they'll take them down coffees and cake and tea and whatever, and, you know, look after them, and so the whole town just does it for nothing. They don't get paid, they just do it, and I just think that's a whole part of this race that no one really talks about. And same with AMSA in Canberra, who is the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, and, you know, so I went to their like Fort Knox kind of like bunker type building where, you know, you go in there and there's all these monitors everywhere, and I asked them about, you know, what is it like to be in control of the search and rescue, and you know, it's the Sydney Hobart, how does it affect things for them? So I think it's 14% of the world's ocean is what Australia has to manage. It's huge. And the Sydney Hobart is just this added complexity to what is already a complex role they have to play. So there's all those kind of things. Biggie Badnack, who's here, is a race finisher. You know, he's had a long association. He's a behind-the-scenes guy that has done a huge amount of effort for the race. And all those different people, I think, just make it what it is. And with Di, you know, I kind of had the idea that with the book, it's laid out in the journey of the race. So you start at the beginning when you arrive and you're getting ready to go, and then you go to the start line, and then you start, and then you go around the turning market, and you go down the coast, across Bass Strait, around Tasman, into the Derwent, and to the finish. And that's how it's laid out. And so what I realised after a little while was that Guy was really the one that knew all of this and knew all the stories around those moments that were interesting and had all that fact and story that she could add to that, so that the portraits, the stories that I've done are interceded by these chapters that tell the story of the race overall, and I think it's worked out really well, so I'm happy with that particular idea that works. So,
I think you did.
yeah.
And as you say, actually legitimately sort of charts. You've charted the book as you would chart the race.
Yeah.
There's so many great quotes in the book, and I know particularly for people who are familiar with the race or sailing it, certainly you will possibly be in the book with one of your quotes. But some of the ones that, like Dana Hobart, and we don't have Christmas time, we have Hobart time. You know, you mentioned Amsterdam and Canberra and obviously Eden, and I love how for many Australians, certainly Tasmanians, we know where Eden is because of the Sydney to Hobart,
Yeah.
which would make my geography teacher blush. But I'm interested to know that clubs and maritime officials, were so generous when you came on here. Is that because you have an open face, Andy?
I don't know, maybe they thought, no, this guy is never going to do that. Yeah, so I think they were going. I don't know, yeah, persistence, I suppose. But everyone's very passionate about the race, and that I think rings true. Everyone loves it for various different reasons, and I think that's really special. One of the things I loved about the Eden trip was to find out that the CYC, they take the school children up there every year, so they can experience sailing on Sydney Harbour, and they give them training and all that kind of stuff, and that's what they give back to the Eden community as a thank you. And I think that's just really, it's been very special for that community that do that. And yeah, it's just one of those races that everybody has an affinity to it for some reason, and I guess I really wanted to try and dig into that to some degree and find different angles and different stories about it. Not all the guys have all done the race and they've all experienced the extreme conditions, but in different ways. Disco, who's why is Disco called Disco? Like, do you know why Disco? He's got a bald head. Is that what
Party time.
Party
time.
Disco bald head. But he helms a lot, and so his whole story really is about helming the big boat, and what that's like, and what it's like to launch it off a wave and into air. What he told me, whether it's true or not. I mean, half these stories might be all lies,
He told it as it was.
Yeah,
on
well,
his
I think
medium size sort of boats. He brought it alive. That's exactly how it can be.
Yeah.
What was consistently said in the research that you both did?
In what respect, honey? Sorry.
Because I kind of picked up occasionally you would sort of hear the same sort of comment that seemed to suggest that the experience is unique, but it is shared around in the camaraderie of the sailing fraternity. And I just wondered if you kept encountering a kind of a consistent comment.
Themes and stuff. Yeah.
Themes, yeah.
Well, for me, it was the mateship, really. It's like Paul Clitheroe said, when you're 100 miles off the coast and out of the range of helicopters, and you can't stop, you can't press pause, there's no turning back, and there's no water buoys, I think is what he said. And that's that experience, I think, is profound, and there's not really anything like it other than maybe climbing Mount Everest or something, perhaps. But to do that as a group of individuals on a boat and to go through extreme conditions is, from what I've listened to, is something altogether different. I don't think you can replicate that anywhere. Purely because you can't stop. You can't just go, okay, let's just pause, guys, just stop for a minute. I mean, you could hove too, I suppose, they could do that if they wanted to, but all the same, you still can't. You still got to wait for the conditions to ease. And that's different. And that's what I find humbling about the ocean myself. When I get out there and experience the storm, it's humbling. You can't just go, okay, I've had enough now, I'm going to just go home. Yeah.
I think for a lot of people the race is an equaliser, and that comes through in the book. It doesn't matter whether you're, Neville Crichton with your multi-millions, or you're the little guy on the army boat, the 9.2 metre army boat, and for all that money in a rough sea, you too can be spewing over the side or over the back. I mean, it really is an equaliser, and there are people out there, you know, the new people to the race every year, racing against some of the absolute champions of this race, of the Olympic Games, of the America's Cup, and everybody. And it's the one sport, and that is something a lot of people say, it's the one sport where you can be Joe Blow, or you can be, I mean, we've had royalty, we had Pierre Casaraghi do the race, we've had Edward Heath, the Prime Minister of the UK, and, you know, down to my little mates on the 9.2 metre army boat, and Tom Slingsby's, and James Spithill's, and it's just everybody, and that's what people love about that race is, and after it, when you get to dock down here in Hobart, that everyone's just talking to each other, like everyone's just on an equal footing, and even the Premier, you know, Premier, Will, how are you? Because he's one of us. I'd actually like to know from you what your favourite experience during your time as Premier and with this race was.
Yeah, it was a funny experience for me each year, because it was sort of end of the year, trying to wind down. I promised, I committed to immerse myself in this race and the event, because it was, I think, so special to our state. When I say we perhaps don't fully appreciate what it is and what it can be, I often thought government maybe didn't realise what an amazing thing it was. So hence that commitment to be as available as I could. Now, there are plenty of times it was almost like waiting for a baby to arrive and trying to juggle family time and get back to see my in-laws in Western Australia and race back in time to be on the water to greet the Lion Honours winner was an extraordinary challenge, and each and every year it was so different. That's the thing. I mean, I reckon for media guys, this is, you know, easy stuff. There's a story every day. There's amazing characters who participate. There are international class yachties right down to locals who are great copy. But I honestly don't think any year was the same. They were all so different. There was drum. We've had tragedy on the water right through to the most, you know, remarkable finishes, protests, all sorts of things. It's just, you know, I think that's the distinguishing thing about it. There's no constant theme. This is an amazing story each and every year, beautifully captured in this book, of course. But I think it's an amazing part of our story. It's an amazing credit to the people who sail it, the clubs that administer it. I think is a really important thing as well, and it's a part of who we are. So.
Did you ever get a call from Di at 3 a.m?
I got often. I was, you know, my phone was off. I felt like a neglectful father to be, because sometimes I missed the boat. Yeah.
Tracy, why did you ring the Premier?
When the first boat goes around Tasman, we've got a list of numbers to ring, so everyone go on board to meet them when they come across the line. And my role the last couple of years was to ring Will and get him out of bed to get him down to the club and on the boat.
Lucky you.
You've got to remember, I've got other stuff going on at the time too. The last thing perhaps a Premier wants to be is seen as somebody who's, you know, out yachting and spending his time with millionaires and swanning about the place. So it was often a difficult thing to juggle, and I get a bit of sun on me, and people presumed, I think, that I was perhaps a sailor myself. I know that, but yeah, it's such a special thing to be part of. I guess in my own sad way, it was me vicariously being part of this great event through the role I had, and, you know, I thank everyone who was part of that experience for me. It's a wonderful thing to be part of.
Di, when would you come down to Hobart and how? When the race, they say 26, 1 p.m, bam, we're away.
So I have a team of people working with me, and so we spread ourselves. I've got a couple coming down late afternoon of the 26th. I arrive on the morning of the 27th, usually with the Commodore, keep him under control of the leash, and
That's Sydney for you.
I'm sure Noel will be thrilled to hear that. And, you know, get off to the hotel, get organised, straight down to work. So the phones switch over down to Hobart end as I'm leaving Sydney, and so my people in Hobart take over until I arrive in Hobart. So phone straight on, straight down, then dump the bags at the Grand Chancellor usually, and straight down there. And so I have a couple following me later that afternoon. But I usually stay in Sydney until the 27th, into that first sked in the morning, just in case anything happens dramatic in that early part of the race. So then onto a plane and down we come.
The race certainly has had its fair share of dramatic moments, of course, because it's happening in a natural landscape, an unpredictable landscape to a greater or lesser degree. We obviously talk a lot about the 98 race. In fact, I'm sure we all remember where we were. I remember turning on the television at 5 a.m. in London in the middle of the night about to go to work, and the first image I saw was Battery Point. And I remember thinking, am I dreaming? I must be asleep. I must be dreaming, because it was making international news. So, but it's not the only race by any stretch that has been heralded. How would you describe the sort of the emotions that are still shared with you from the sailing fraternity around the big races in terms of those ones? The strong ones.
People become so close because of those dramatic ones. 84 was a very tough one, and at that stage I was doing a lot of sailing. But 93 I particularly remember because boats were just falling over. I was working with Craig McCauley, who's at the back of the room, and Penny Campbell, just the three of us, and Kodak was the sponsor of the race then, and they had to dive in and help us, all these directors from Kodak, because I remember having a piece of butcher paper on the wall in the media centre, which was at the Grand Chancellor, which was the Sheraton at the time. And the list was just getting longer and longer, and it just started to get a bit scary, and we ended up just not going to bed. We stayed in that hotel room anyway, and then John Quinn fell off his boat Mem, and on board was Techie Dalton, who was Mr. Safety. So for all the boats, and it was rough, it's the most relentless race we've ever had. People talk about 98 being the hard one, but if you speak to a lot of yachties, they'll tell you 93 was a lot worse because it was relentless from the south, it was punishing. And so when Quinn went over the side, after the 4th hour, we'd all written him off. We thought, this is it. And 5 hours passed, and we got nearly to the 6th hour, and we get this call. Paul Sorrell, this big tanker, just spotted him with a searchlight. And there was another boat nearby, which was John Story, the Irish boat Atara. And they were delaminating, and they busted their rig, and so they weren't in great shape either. But they ended up going and picking John Quinn up. They rolled him onto the boat with great effort, and got him down into a bunch to try and warn him up. I got raced down by helicopter to Eden to just stop the onslaught of media, and I knew everybody on Atara quite well, and so they come into Eden and they've got up onto the dock there, and we're trying to keep the media at bay, and I'm looking at everybody that's got off the boat, and I thought, Quinny must still be on board, and I hadn't met him at this stage. So I remember saying to Fraser Johnson, where's John Quinn? And he said, that's him there. And this guy just walks off the boat. The rest of the crew with this funny little, tea cosy hat on. And he just starts talking to the media, not a problem, and the ambos are there trying to get him to, you need to get a checkup, you need to be looked at. Oh, I'm fine, no, into that ambo, mate. And he was just so amazing. And then I went back to Hobart by helicopter, and I just so remember being there for the line honours and the overall winners coming in, and they were just exhausted. They were just bloodshot eyes. I can still see Andy Strachan, who owned 97, and his crew and Greenie. I can still see all their faces like it was yesterday. And then they took line honours on a 47-foot yacht, and behind them, who vied for line honours the whole way there, was Cuckoo's Nest, Nigel Holman, who's no longer with us. And again, I could see Nigel with his bloodshot eyes, and Darren Sinogles and David Lyons, the designer. I could just see them all, and I so remember Bill Ratcliffe, who's done 50 races now, and he had a little boat called, an S&S boat called Marara, and he's just arrived, you know, this tiny boat, and he just came up to me and he said, "Di, I'm effed." He was he could hardly stand up. He said, "That is the hardest race I've ever done." And he said, "I just need a shower. Can you just lead me to a shower?" And so that was that race, and Craig will tell you, Craig McCoy at the back, how tough that race was. We were just taking little catnaps on this in our media centre, and the Kodak guys were fabulous, trying to keep us fed, weren't they, Craig? And really looking after us and trying to do, because there was just 3 of us, you know, it was a small team then, and most of the boats retired. We had a huge retirement out of that race, and the media were at us and at us and at us as to should we have been running that race. And there's a lot of ignorance amongst the general media about our race, and why didn't you just call it off after they've started? And we said, well, it's not like a hockey match where you're on a field and you can just walk off again. So they were giving us, I remember Lee Moynihan was our Commodore at the time, and they were giving him a really hard time, some of them, but they just didn't understand the nature of, you don't just say, okay, there's 60 knots out, I'll just pull out here. It's not that simple, is it?
Di, it's lovely to hear you mention the name Peter Campbell, and we will miss him this summer very much. Craig, can you put your hand up? Craig? Hello, Craig. Do you have any particular fond memories as Di has been referring to?
Oh, I just remember the John Quinn going over, and just the elation of him being discovered, and then sending him a message. And in fact, through this, what's changed a lot is the communication from the media centre, and it was once upon a time it was fax. Because now it's all, and boats carry, you know exactly where they are at whatever time. I remember sending out a fax that morning that John Quinn had been found, and just the whole place just lit up for the 2 or 3 of us that were there. You know, the phone's going, "Can I speak to Peter Campbell? Can I speak to Peter Campbell? Can I speak to Peter Campbell?" Everybody wanted to know, and it was just a great story that day. It was the story of the day, the story of the year.
Thank you, Craig. Yeah, thank you very much. You actually, I love hearing you use the word facts, and one of the stories that I picked out of the book, Andy, was Bruce Taylor from Chutzpah, describing on the day of the race in the old days, you'd buy the Sydney Morning Herald and you just rip out the weather page, and that's what you took off. That's just fantastic.
Yeah, well, even at 98, I was surprised the AMSA guys were saying that, because today it's all digital, but in 98 there were still paper charts. They were doing it all plotting on paper, and you know.
So how long ago was that?
In 98, so that's 20 years ago, which doesn't seem that long ago really, 98. But the digital revolution didn't really kick in until later, and you know, to have such an extreme thing happening in 98. And the other thing that I learned was that the search and rescue, the naval search and rescue and the air search and rescue grew out of the Navy and the Army or the Air Force. Simple. Read, you get it completely correct in the book. But basically, neither the two shall talk to each other. So a lot of the aircraft couldn't talk to the boats. They didn't have the same radios and frequencies and stuff like that. So AMSA used to have to send down specific gear to the aircraft they were chartering, because they charter or commission aircraft to search for them, and put the stuff into the craft so they could all talk to each other. And it was just kind of mind-boggling to me that you wouldn't just have a national thing, and that's taken, because they're all kind of like, no, we're a Navy and you're Army and you're Air Force, no, it's all different. But yeah, so it's amazing really that not more people died in 98. There's a lot of the reports that came out really were a lot of the boats went up to scratch in lots of ways, and just the safety measures, people got caught out by it in a way, in some ways. But the 93 is definitely what everyone talks about as the hardest, because it was just relentless day after day after day until suddenly the 98 was different because it depended on how fast your boat was, whether you got caught to them or not. A lot of the bigger boats were gone before. I'm looking at Di because she'll correct me if I'm wrong here. Yeah, so a lot of bigger boats were already through it, whereas some of the other boats were either too slow or they were right in the guts of it. Ed Basalta's day, he talks about 94, I think it was.
For the
Little boats, yeah, he said that was the hardest, and they actually, because all the big boats got through before the southerly came in, and then there's this smaller fleet, which is the majority of the fleet, that caught this big change, and they ended up having to stop in at Bicheno, which is not a great place to go into, you know, and he said it was freezing cold, so cold, and they just had to stop because it was just full on, and yeah.
Did they continue? Did they keep
They
going?
got to try Bono, I think, and staggered into the pub, and they made them go outside and get changed because they were so
That's a first.
something like that, you know. I'm not paraphrasing a little bit, but there's so many stories. It's hard to remember who said what, but yeah.
You don't realise how bad you smell till you get off the boat, and then everybody tells you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, and shortly we will wrap up this part of our conversation, but continue obviously with you and any questions that you may have. So please don't be shy. But I was struck with Adrienne Cahalan, sorry Stephanie, her sister, of course, who many of us will know here in Hobart, Cahalan, because she's a legendary navigator, and the description, and I was thinking, oh, that's so obvious, I didn't even think about it. But the race is so remarkable because you travel from 33 degrees south to 43 degrees. Is that one of the contributing factors, obviously, that makes the race iconic?
It's unique, isn't it, really, to the city of Hobart. A lot of the other long distance races and Fletch and Hackney and everyone, but you stay in the same latitude, and so the weather conditions don't change as dramatically as they do. And Adrienne talked about, she's a great example of the fact that, you know, with her I could talk a lot about being an onboard navigator. She's one of the best navigators in the world, really, and you know that because the Supermaxes go so fast, they're all about trying to get from one weather system to another weather system, making the right moment to try and jump off one and go to the next. And there's all this, you know, they have the particular ways of going past. You know, what's the trick that you would tell me, because you know they've all got their little secrets.
Do you have to kill you afterwards?
Yeah. But yeah, it's that going from north to south, you go through all these different weather patterns, and that's why you get the big southerlies and stuff, and that's what makes the Hobart particularly, am I right, Fletch? Pretty much? Yeah.
With the Derwent at the end to make you cry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Haven't we all seen that? I wanted to also mention just finally weather guru Roger Bannon.
Clouds.
Yeah, tell us about clouds.
Yeah, I've known Clouds probably for over 40 years. And Clouds is a man who doesn't like wearing shoes. Clouds is just your everyday man, but he's so smart, and he's done a lot of, not just weather. When people say weatherman, that's kind of insulting Clouds, because Clouds is a very scientific person that understands about global warming. He understands everything, and he works a lot around the world. And we used to have him as our weather person for the Hobart, but he became in big demand for all these America's Cups. He's working with Team New Zealand this year, Emirates Team New Zealand, because he's so smart. You know, he's so smart, Cloud. So even though we have the Bureau, I hope there's no one from the Bureau in this room, but everybody still, they pay Clouds for the weather. I mean, Clouds just seems to have a direct connection to upstairs, because Clouds is very rarely wrong. I couldn't tell you the last time Clouds got it wrong, and a lot of people don't get to meet Clouds outside of sitting on the seawall at Rushcutters Bay on Boxing Day morning, because he won't go anywhere that he has to wear shoes. He's down the south coast, and he just likes being a barefoot ninja.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's a. I tried to meet up with him when I first went up there, and he was like, "Oh, I've got this, and this going." And like, he's like, they all want the very last kind of schedule for the start. They all want to get the last one, because it's the most accurate and all that kind of stuff. And but he was on the global warming thing. What I ended up with. He was working for Ferrari, Formula One. He doesn't just do boats and I just thought you've got this amazing perspective of the globe and the way that the weather system works and the whole world works globally, because that's how he looks at things. And it's if you're interested in that sort of perspective and intimate knowledge of stuff, it's worth reading his story, because he's just so incredibly smart about it. And,
Maybe he needs to grace the cover of your next book, Andy.
Well, he's a cool guy. So he came and sat next to me at the Wooden Boat Festival and just hung out. I think he had shoes on. Maybe that's why I was a bit grumpy. Let's go see him here. So that's fine.
That's very unassuming, isn't
He
it?
is so
Quite
unassuming.
unassuming, down to earth, lovely man.
I'd love to find out if there is anyone here in the room who would love or is busting to ask a question of our wonderful trio here. Please just raise your hand, and if you don't have a big voice, I do, and I'll share it with our guests. Any questions, please? Please, over here.
Thank you. So one for Di. Unusual. Disclosure, I'm Steve Parker. I do the radio reporting on the race. So I'm one of those media people. Further disclosure, once Di suggested it might be appropriate to rip up my media accreditation, as I recall. We were so passionate, we sat outside and we worked things out, and we've become good chums, haven't we? Good friends.
We had a quiet chat, there was no threat of ripping up. We had a quiet chat on the seat outside, and it was between us and nobody else until tonight.
Do you feel this year we've dodged a bullet in light of the COVID situation and the fact that the Sydney Hobart 2020 is one of less than a handful of traditional events that are actually going to go ahead? How does that make you feel?
Believe you me, I needed the money.
It's a straight answer, Steve.
It was my first job back since March. No, I mean, it's thrilling for everybody, for both clubs, Royal Yacht Club of Tassie, CYC, all the yachties, anyone associated with the race is thrilled to see the race go ahead, because we were all waiting. And that was really hard. And, everyone's saying, do you think it'll go ahead? I don't know. How long is a piece of string? And, is it true the race is now going to be the Sydney to Melbourne race and Sydney? No. I spent one Friday answering really silly questions like that. But, so it was an absolute thrill when I got the call to say, at the moment, we're looking good. And then I thought, I've now got to do 5 months' work in 5 weeks. And I went, oh my God. But yeah, it's fantastic for everyone concerned with the race that race is going ahead. And it gives people something to enjoy again, like the cricket, like the state of origin.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you, Steve, for the questions. Nice to put a face to the voice. Any other questions? Thank you for here, Jack.
Hey, given the interest in books like this and these stories that are so, they're the everyday sailors, they're the guys that you don't know about, you don't hear about. Yes, I know some of them are quite well known and stuff, but is it a conscious decision when it comes to reporting on the race that the focus is largely given in terms of what we see on the telly and on the radio and stuff like that on the big boats? The Comanches and the Wild Oats and the Lives and stuff. And then there's just so many of these phenomenal stories that are sometimes the last boats that we just, maybe we hear the last boats because they're the last boat, but there's that huge middle pack that we just don't seem to hear or see anything on. There's clearly an appetite for it when we see books like this come out.
You do actually, it's like anything. It's like the Melbourne Cup. All eyes are on the winning horse, and that's what all the reports are about. What crossed the line first? And that goes in a lot of sport. And unfortunately with sailing, like in other sport, you're on a field or with Melbourne Cup, you're on a track and it's all over within 5 minutes. But sailing's not like that. Line owner's boat can be at home before the last boat arrives here. So it gets really tricky, and it's always been this way. People go, oh, those super maxis, you know, they take all the glory, but really only the TVs tend to do that. But if you're watching TV in the lead up to the race, there is a lot of media about a lot of other things. So for the instance, this year, we're celebrating 75 years of women sailing in the race, and I know Channel 7's putting together a package on that. Already we're doing radio stuff, but people are not listening hard in the lead up to an event or afterwards. All they're seeing is the TV with the line honours boats. They go, oh, you always cover line honours boats. But, you know, we've got a lot of reporters. Amanda Loveham at the Telegraph's a great example of, and Dee McNichol at the Australian, Adrian Warren at AAP, Rupert Guinness in the past at the Herald. They're covering heaps of stories in the lead up to the race, but not everybody's buying those papers where TV is so easy. Turn on, you hit the button, and there it is in front of you. So it's a little unfair to say that. And okay, yes, TV is going out their heads again because people don't understand the handicap nature of our race. You know, I can look out on the harbour as the boats go out their heads and go, that boat's doing well, that boat's doing well, that boat's doing. And I follow the tracker religiously, and I can see a pattern evolving of who's looking good overall. But for the general public, what they understand is what's leading that race. And I've even been on flights coming down here on the 27th. I remember one year, there was this pack of kids having a holiday. They would have been in their teens, their parents are with them, and they're going, oh, I wonder if we'll see wild oats out the window. I wonder if, like, they knew wild oats because they understand that concept of that boat's out in front. So it's tricky when it's not over in 5 minutes. The race is going a lot of times, sometimes into New Year's Eve and sometimes into the next morning, and up until Super Maxis, the race could even go for 8 days when I first started covering it. So how do you keep media interested? They've moved on to something else a lot of times, but in the lead up, we get plenty of, I dig out all those great human interest stories and all of those outlets, including the TV stations. I've already done it for Seven, and I've done it for the IMG Film Company. Like, I wanted the stories this year. And the other problem being too is the crew list. They don't have to be in until the first week of December, by which stage a lot of the outlets have got their stories ready. So even I don't know a lot of times until I'm talking to people on the phone, did you hear we've got so-and-so on our boat, and did you hear about what happened to this guy? And so a lot of it's coming to you very late, and you know there's over 1,000 people in that yacht race, close to 2,000 these days, so it's a tricky one. It's tricky.
We're right on 6:30 or shortly thereafter, so I might perhaps wrap it up here unless someone is bursting to share a question, because you know that you'll get a chance to have further conversations with Di and with Andy and with Will if you like, and get their autographs in the book. So I've just volunteered, you will. And then it's just a short walk down the hill to, I believe, a bar or a watering hole where you can drink vertically safely. But would you please join with me in thanking Andrew, Wilson, Di Pearson and Will Hodgman.
Yes, thanks very much, Jane. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It was a great night, and it's one of those nights where I wouldn't, I hate to call it quits on, because we could stay here for hours, I'm sure. Big thanks to the RSCT Hotel and the bar, who thinks they're on a winner with an audience like this, and they're going to stay open. So whilst we're practicing social distancing in the line for the signing table, the bar will be open in here, so don't feel you've got to rush away. Thanks very much, ladies and gentlemen, once again. Another round of applause, please.
Thank you.